Okay, turn to John chapter 10. John chapter 10 holds with it one of the most important principles for a healthy spirituality. It is so simple. We all acknowledge it. We say it very easily. But the question has to be, when we say these words, what does that really mean? What does it mean in the practical day-to-day living? What does it mean in the response? What does it mean when I'm living a life that has different areas of pressure and anxiety? What does it mean when I'm losing patience? What does it mean when I'm in relational conflict? What do these words mean? This truth is so important, and that truth is very simple. Jesus is always here. He is always holding you, and you are eternally secure in the grip of his grace. It's foundational. We all acknowledge it. But the question is, does this very simple truth that you are always and forever in the grip of God's grace, does it inform your day-to-day living? Does it inform your understanding of yourself and the way you construct your own self-concept and your own identity? It's critical, because when we start at a place of security, then our spirituality is a response. When we start from a place of insecurity, our spirituality is a consistent pursuit of improvement. We are trying to become worthy of that which we have already been given. So it's critical that we not just sing about this idea, that we just not ponder it for a moment, but it's got to come into this central focus, that it is a defining factor of the way you define yourself, the way you understand the world, and the way you posture yourself before the world. Paying attention to the rhythms of our life and asking ourselves, is the way that I live indicative of a conviction that I live in a safe and generous universe? Or is the way that I live indicative that I'm insecure because I live in a universe of lack, and I live before a God who has a transactional relationship with me? So let's take a look and see what Jesus has to say about these words. Let's just read the whole text for a moment. We're going to be looking at verses 19 through 30, but we'll go ahead and start with reading John at verse 17. We touched on that last week, and it creates some context for verse 19. The reason my Father loves me is that I lay down my life only to take it up again. No one takes it from me, but I lay it down of my own accord. I have authority to lay it down and authority to take it up again. This command I received from my Father. The Jews who heard these words were again divided. Many of them said, "He is demon-possessed and raving mad. Why listen to him?" But others said, "These are not the sayings of a man possessed by a demon. Can a demon open the eyes of the blind?" So see, we're still kind of hovering in the context created by the miracle of healing the blind man in John 9. Now, this is really important as we read through this, because as I grew up reading the Bible, I would read some of these references and just kind of move on past to the good stuff. But these details are so very important. Look at this next detail. Then came the festival of dedication at Jerusalem. It was winter, and Jesus was in the temple courts walking in Solomon's colonnade. The Jews who were there gathered around him, saying, "How long will you keep us in suspense? If you are the Messiah, tell us plainly." Jesus answered, "I did tell you, but you do not believe. The works I do in my Father's name testify about me, but you do not believe because you are not my sheep." Which is a really interesting thing that he's saying to the Jews gathered around in the temple. This would have been shocking for them. "My sheep listen to my voice. I know them and they follow me. I give them eternal life, and they shall never perish. No one will snatch them out of my hand. My Father, who has given them to me, is greater than all. No one can snatch them out of my Father's hand. I and the Father are one. So he has this imagery, and he says it twice. I am the shepherd, my sheep hear my voice. No one can snatch them out of my hand. And then he reinforces it by saying, I and the Father are one, and no one can snatch them out of my Father's hand. And what is the criteria for being qualified as being one of Jesus' sheep? A belief system, a doctrinal affirmation? Nope. It is whether or not you've recognized the voice of the Spirit, of the shepherd calling you. The criteria is, you're my sheep if you hear my voice. Now, we continue this conversation that's been moving along in John chapter 9, and as we pointed out, there is a rising tension and this escalating division that has taken place within the narrative. The people are divided by Jesus' words. Some of them call him demon-possessed, while others are really moved by the evidence of his miraculous works, his healing works. And in this controversy now, Jesus is standing in the temple courts during the festival of dedication. All right, you Bible nerds, what is that also known as? Hanukkah. Very good, front row. Well done. Oh, is it in the notes? Well use of the notes. That's right. I forgot. I always forget about the notes. Yes. Thank you for your honesty, Adam. It's Hanukkah. It's a moment that is pregnant with religious and national memory. It's really important that we take a moment and get into the mindset of the climate of what's taken place. What was Hanukkah? This was a festival that commemorated the rededication of the second temple after it had been defiled by foreign occupation under Antiochus Epiphanes. It was a season of light and courage and restored worship. It's against this backdrop that Jesus walks into Solomon's colonnade, the edge of the sacred temple, and he speaks of his own identity as the good shepherd who knows his sheep, who holds them, and who is one with the Father. This is the three major ideas Jesus speaks about in this section, is that he is the shepherd who knows his sheep, he is the shepherd who holds the sheep in his hand, and he is the shepherd who is one with God. And among that Jewish audience, as they are celebrating Hanukkah, that has a very interesting history. And it's really interesting that we're told that this happens during Hanukkah, that Jesus is in the temple in Solomon's colonnade, and that Jews surround him. This is not like it doesn't read like it's mild interest. It reads like aggression. They surround him and they say, tell us plainly, are you the Messiah? Well, this is a really heavily messianic season that they're in, because this idea of Hanukkah and the menorah, and we've probably seen references to it in popular culture, if not in our religious subculture, of the menorah with the 8 lampstands, and they light the candles. This was because it was a commemoration of a rededication of the temple, but what happened before the rededication of the temple was a revolution led by a family. It was known as the Maccabean Revolution, because the Maccabees are the ones that first instigated and organized, and it's because Antiochus Epiphanes comes in and he starts putting, he's a Greek Syrian king, ruler, and he doesn't allow the Jews to continue some of their customs, and he goes in and he actually defiles the temple. He actually went in and sacrificed a pig on the temple. And when he did, he spilt the pig blood and spilt it all over the temple and the altar and some of the other holy instruments. And so this was enough to stir up a revolutionary movement among the Jewish people. And to everyone's surprise, the Maccabean revolution was a success. And so when they go in and they rededicate the second temple and they go through the rituals of purity and whatnot, there was a lamp that was supposed to be lit, and it was supposed to never, ever, ever run out. It was supposed to be a perpetual light, and that flame represented the perpetual presence of Yahweh among Israel there within the temple itself. And the reason why the 8 lampstand is celebrated is because the legend is whenever they dedicated the temple, because so much of the oil had been defiled, they had to wait for about a week to produce more oil. But it was time for the temple dedication. They only had enough oil for the lamp to remain lit for one day. And the Maccabees decided to go ahead and light that lamp. And much to their surprise, that lamp that had 1 day's worth of oil remained lit for 8 days until they were able to produce more oil for the lamp. And so it was a miraculous testimony in their minds. The way they interpret that was this endorsement that God was always with them, that his presence was perpetually there, and this miracle was worked where there wasn't enough oil to keep the lamp lit, yet it remained lit nonetheless. And so, while others are here remembering and celebrating a restored building, when they say temple and Jesus says temple, we are not discussing the same physical structure. They're celebrating this restored building, but Jesus is implying that he himself is the new and true temple. Why? Because he claims he is the place where the divine dwells. Not in a building made by human hands, but embodied in the incarnation of Jesus Christ, God in flesh, God and humanity, divinity and humanity, one in the same. So he is the place where the presence of God dwells, but he is also the place where the presence of God heals. Thus, hearkening back to the miracle that they are still trying to wrap their heads around. So Jesus is not just a teacher pointing the way to safety and wholeness. Jesus is the way. Jesus doesn't just point to the way. Jesus is the way. And so the first encounter was with this disbelief. Jews who heard the words were divided. Many said he's demon-possessed and mad. Why listen to him? Others says he can't be demon-possessed because these aren't the sayings of a demon, and a demon can't open the eyes of the blind. And this is not the first time that we've seen division in response to Jesus' words. So this becomes very instructive to us because it reminds us that truth doesn't always unify. Sometimes it reveals the fault lines in our expectations and belief systems. And when we talk about that, truth doesn't always unify. Oftentimes we're thinking about factions like this person and that person, or this group and that group, and there's a truth one is convicted by and the other isn't, and so there's division. Those are realities. Of course they are. We've all experienced them. We will continue to experience them, and we will work through them through the grace and presence of the Spirit. But what I want to highlight is it also means the truth of Jesus doesn't always bring peace and unity initially to your own soul. Because you have to remember, Jesus is committed to convincing you that he loved you enough to lay down his life for you. And you've got a history of experiences and ideas and information in your head that is constantly providing a case for why that might not be true for you. But Jesus is committed to it. He is more committed to that than he is committed to. Remember, Jesus did not leave behind a systematic theology that we're supposed to be discipled into. This is something that the church, that men who constructed the organization of the church in time put in place. But Jesus did not put this into place. He is not committed to an ideology. He is committed to you knowing who he is and therefore who you are. Therefore, his truth may and oftentimes bring conflict with whatever ideology you were told to assume without question. So sometimes following Jesus in the long run is characterized by peace, but along the way, in the micro seasons, there may be many, many seasons of tension. So just like there's this tension within the characters within the story, trying to wrap their head around these concepts and having different opinions and ideas, those kinds of tension live, those voices live between our own ears. Those tensions are there too, and that truth of Jesus doesn't always initially unify. Sometimes it upsets the system. Truth sometimes reveals the fault lines in those expectations and belief system. Jesus had just spoken about being the good shepherd, and the people are divided. Some of them dismiss him entirely, and others pause because of what they've seen. The healing of a man that they knew to be born blind. And the question becomes not just what we hear, but how we interpret what we see. And I know this is a very important principle to Christians. We sloganize it a lot, that the truth matters. The truth ultimately is absolute. And that's fine as long as we have the humility to admit that our interpretations are not absolute. We cannot put the truth and our interpretations of the truth in equal standing, because our interpretations are always limited by our maturity, what we are capable of understanding and knowing. Our interpretations are also informed by teachers that just told us directly what we were to believe. And many of us, that happened while we were children. So we hadn't even developed the cognitive ability to think objectively. So it's very difficult whenever you're told, you're given a paradigm of what you're supposed to see, say when you read the scriptures or look at the life of Jesus. Well, that's all you're going to see. And as you grow up and you realize that life is more complex, there are questions that can be asked. So many times these filters, these belief systems come to us before we're even able to discern. So that means that part of learning, a large part of learning, involves unlearning. And it means that our interpretations always have to be held with humility. One of my favorite prayers from one of the great mystics, I would quote, but I'm afraid I might get it wrong. I can't remember right now which one it was, but it's a prayer that I've returned to a lot. And I remember it because it was so offensive to 26-year-old Artie when he first read it. And the mystic simply prayed, God, deliver me of God that I might see God. I didn't understand that for the longest time, but what he was saying is this: there's the God we worship, and then there's the interpretation and the body of ideology that we use to try to comprehend and understand that God. And that's fine. That's how rational beings work. But it is critical that we always remember that the ideology that we, and thoughts that we use to discuss and comprehend God in total do not represent God himself. He is always beyond our ability to conceptualize. Therefore, we cannot be so committed to the God that we've created this structure around that we miss the God who's trying to reveal himself beyond that structure. And so we can't be so committed to our ideas that we seeking the God that they represent. There is the thing, and then there is the sign. The sign is not the thing. And this becomes the most difficult thing to work through, particularly if you are in the Bible Belt evangelicalism, because so much of our understanding of salvation, we're told, relies upon our cognitive ability to believe and confess and affirm certain ideas. And I'm not demonizing that. I'm not saying that there's not value to that. But it is always important to remember that the strength of our salvation, our security, is not in our ability to articulate right doctrine. It is as solid as the hand of God wrapped around your life in loving grace. That is the source of our security, not our beliefs or our behavior. These things ought to be always in flux and transforming as we're growing and we're understanding more. And so it is clearly important that we understand the role that interpretation plays in the way we live out our faith. Faith doesn't always begin with clarity. Sometimes it begins with tension, with the discomfort of not knowing exactly what to believe, but being drawn toward life nonetheless. Then came the festival of dedication, verse 22, at Jerusalem. It was winter, and Jesus was in the temple courts, walking in Solomon's colonnade. The Jews were gathered around him, saying, "How long will you keep us in suspense? If you are the Messiah, tell us plainly." Now again, remember what we said before. Hanukkah is not just a religious holiday. It is entwined with their religion, but also with their national identity. And Jesus stands in the very place where people celebrated the reclaiming of sacred space, and they press him with this question, "Are you the Messiah?" And it doesn't seem like this is a pleasant, inquisitive conversation. They're surrounding him, they're pressing in, and the Greek implies more of a confrontation. There's pressure, there's suspicion, but here's the thing. Jesus gloriously refuses to play by the terms that they demand. He will not offer a political or ideological label. He will not fit into their assumed expectations. He will not fit into their preconceptions of who he's supposed to be. Instead, what does he do? He just returns to what he's already said and done. Look at my words and look at my works. Verse 25. Jesus answered, "I did tell you, but you do not believe. The works I do in my Father's name testify about me. But you do not believe because you are not my sheep. My sheep listen to my voice. I know them, and they follow me." Now, I don't think that what Jesus is doing here is being like petty and mean. He's speaking of profound truth. This moment is not about exclusion. He doesn't say, "You are not my sheep and you never will be." That is not what he's saying. What he is saying is, to follow me implies more than just having some kind of preconceived idea that's wrapped up in some sort of political, theological ideology. What he is saying is the heart of being a Christian is being someone who's oriented their life around posturing themselves to listen to the voice of the shepherd and follow him. And this is what he points to. And he said, you're not my sheep simply because you don't hear me, but my sheep listen to my voice. I know them and they know me. This is not exclusion, it's invitation. Jesus is naming a relational reality. His sheep are not those who have mastered a doctrine, but those who respond to his voice. Now, this is the way Jesus is constructing what this spirituality is supposed to look like. This is why we spend so much time talking about spiritual practices. Particularly, there is a definite stated goal of helping us reframe and broaden our understanding of prayer and of meditation, because these are the gifts that allow us to create a rhythm of life in which we are paying attention to the voices that we're listening to. Because those narratives are always running in our mind. It only comes down to a question of, are you aware or unaware of the internal narratives that are driving your decisions and your behaviors? Because this is the heart of Christian spirituality. It is learning to listen internally to a different voice. In a noisy world, this is no small task. Psychologically, we're constantly managing inner critics, cultural expectations, and spiritual confusion. But Jesus' sheep are those who are learning to quiet those voices and tune their hearts to the one voice that speaks love and truth and safety. And is it important to read historical theology? Absolutely. I think one of the most important things a person can do for their faith is understand particularly the history of the development of Christian doctrine. It's really important that we're aware of the way these ideas that are shaping us, how did they come to be? What were not just the spiritual and theological motivations, but what were the social and financial and political motivations that went into the development of Christian thought as we've come to understand it? We have to be aware of those things, and so it is important to be aware of doctrine. But what Jesus is talking about, this knowing he's talking about, is not intellectual assent, or is it an affirmation of doctrines and ideas. This is the crux. What Jesus invites us into is a participation in divine life. And when we are participating in divine life, that's the place where we hear and respond to the shepherd's voice. It means that this faith walk is a call to re-enter communion. It is a call to say, before you took and ate of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, all your understanding of yourselves and me happened because of the intimacy of our union, because we walked together in the cool of the day. Salvation is turning from being nourished by that cursed tree and re-entering into communion with God, walking with him and understanding the world and ourselves as it becomes defined by our intimate relationship with God. Look at what he says. I know them. Now, I don't know about you, but before, in my background, various teachers, and in my own imagination, if I heard God knows you, it was a threat. In fact, I had one well-meaning disciple who I was talking to, and of course he was asking me all the accountability questions, because the discipleship was mostly about sin management, not an expanding revelation of Christ in me, the hope of glory. But that's okay. That was part of the path. But his advice for dealing with what we would have called sin that I was struggling with, at the time I had no idea that I had undiagnosed mental health struggles and challenges. We just talked about what I was doing about it, and what I was doing about it to find relief was sinful. And so the idea that I'm not making this up, was that the next time you engage in the practice of sin, you should close your eyes and just picture Jesus weeping in the corner over what you're doing. This was the spiritual secret here. And it sounded a little juvenile, but then, of course, not too much longer, there was a popular Christian artist that essentially wrote a song that became a #1 hit that was an articulation of the same theme. And if you grew up in the 80s, you probably heard it. Does he still feel the nails every time I fail? Does he hear the crowd cry, crucify him again? Very popular, moving song, but it's a real simple answer. No, he doesn't. Jesus is not perpetually reminded of his suffering every time we fail and make a mistake. It is, in fact, the celebratory foundation upon why we are forgiven and healed and restored. And so this idea that we're supposed to somehow work it hard to shame ourselves into good behavior because Jesus knows what you're doing, this is not what Jesus is doing here. This idea that I know them, this is not a threat. And this is not divine surveillance. It is intimate awareness. We are not just seen, we are known in all of our contradictions, and we are still called. The test of a healthy spirituality is not whether or not you're confident in God's love when outwardly you're doing well. The test of a healthy spirituality is whether it can sustain you when your heart is broken and you are suffering because of your own poor choices of hypocrisy. And now you're living with the consequences of that reality. Is there a God who looks at you with shame or with infinite tenderness and comprehension? And it's not enough to answer it with your head. What I want to know is what you mean in your heart. There's this interesting test that we used to do called the emotional God view test. And one of the questions on it was, when I'm at my worst, I am afraid God will. And you had to fill in the blank. And when you work with people and do this, it was really important that you have to answer with emotional honesty with how you feel when you're at your worst. Here is what is interesting about working with lots of people and then going to trainings with other people who have worked with individuals in this particular discipleship model. And here are these reports. What is most common, and this is anecdotally, I haven't got a book where we've done research on this. This is anecdotally what I've experienced and what I heard from other people at various training events, is how often people wrote, Christians, long-standing Christians, when I do wrong, I'm afraid God will take one of my children. It was just nearly the number one honest, emotional answer. And you hear that, or you read that with someone, and when someone answers that, and then I took the test myself, and I was quite surprised at the things that spontaneously came out of my heart as I filled out this questionnaire. But you see, this is a problem. This is the same group of people that just hours before we took the test were in a worship service, raising our hands, singing songs, and feeling real good. And yet, on the day-to-day, they live with a God that they fear will get back at them by taking one of their children. See, this has to be addressed. We can't be healthy Christians. We can't be healthy kingdom builders if we're not paying attention to what in our heart we really believe about God. Because whether we want it to or not, it will define the kind of spirituality we pursue, and it will define the kind of ministry that we offer to other people. Look at what he goes on to say. I give them eternal life, and they shall never perish. No one will snatch them out of my hand. My Father who has given them to me is greater than all, and no one can snatch them out of my Father's hands. Now let's sit with this for just a few seconds, a few moments. Jesus' promise is not based on our grip on him, but his grip on us. And this is the turning point. If you are here this morning or watching online, or you've time traveled and you're watching from the future, it's the turning point for so many of us who live with fear, doubt, or trauma in our lives and in our histories. If that is your struggle, it's critical that we understand that his promise is based on his grip on us, not ours on his. Eternal life is not merely about duration. It is about union. It is about life with God starting right now. And Jesus insists you are secure not because of your performance, but because of God's unwavering hold. This invitation is an invitation to rest, not resignation, but to trust. My friends, we are not meant to white knuckle our way through discipleship. We are called to rest in a love that holds us. And resting in a love that holds us produces a very different rhythm and kind of life than a spirituality where we are striving to accomplish and become. And that's why we have to be aware of the perspective from which we're living. You know, when we read this idea, this metaphor, this picture that no one can take us out of the hands of the shepherd, it's important that we really think through that, because in reality, if we're saying, what does this mean and how do we live it, I don't think that any of us really struggle, even though this is how we'll articulate it, that some other entity will take us out of the Father's hands. Sometimes that's how it's read. But you have to remember, you yourself are a no one that counts as one of the ones that can't take him out of his hands. Most of us will stop short of that security by saying, however, there is one person that can remove me from the Father's hand. And you may have even been taught this in Christian churches. You can remove yourself from the Father's hand. And so once that idea, it's just a little seed of an idea, and you can see it's usually done in some context when it seems reasonable because it's an emphasis on the truth of our choices, and I think that is a discussion of wisdom that we have to process without a doubt. But that seed lands, and what bears fruit is a spirituality of performance. I've got to behave well, got to believe well, I've got to do well, or somehow I am going to be less in God's favor than I would have otherwise. But that causes us to build a spirituality of striving to perform, not one rooted in learning how to rest in love. And this is the only place where true, long-lasting transformation can take place. A true imaging the posture and the image of the Son of God. So you have to ask yourself, are you living from security or insecurity? Are you living from security or insecurity? Is your discipleship, is your spiritual practice, is your church involvement, is your religious devotion, is it rooted in insecurity, or is it a response of fruit bearing of a place of security? It's really important that we wrestle with that question and then we're honest with ourselves about that, because we can do lots of Christian things in order to combat our insecurity, and all that we're doing is reinforcing in our minds the idea that I am secure as long as I perform well. But a healthy discipleship has to be rooted in the fact that it is not our responsibility, it is God's responsibility to keep us where we need to be. Now, this becomes a really important discussion depending on how you've been taught to believe what it means that God is sovereign and in control of all things. I don't know, have you ever had moments where you're uncomfortable with the way we talk about these ideas? Almost fatalistically. We have to stop equating the natural consequences of foolish choices with the judgment of God. You have to stop equating the consequences of foolish choices with meaning the judgment of God. Because if the gospel is true, if all these things we sing, nothing but the blood, we're washed by the blood, if any of that's true, then it means God is done with judging sin. But consequences are used in religious circles to continue to manipulate the behavior of the people with these threats. Look, all I'm saying is this. I am not saying that choices are inconsequential. But we have to place this in the proper place. If I choose to continue to consume what they call the SAD diet, the standard American diet, the evidence is pretty clear that it's highly likely I am going to develop some cluster of metabolic disease. Doesn't that sound impressive? because I follow all the right Instagram athletic influencers. That is likely to be true. And if I don't want the consequences of metabolic disease, it probably will mean I'm going to have to stop making foolish choices and start making wise choices. But we have this thing constructed in our minds. Well, they sinned, they ate bad, God judged them by giving them metabolic disease. Now, look, I've met Christians, this kind of perspective comforts them. It's this absolute fatalism where God is ultimately the author behind every impulse in the universe. And if that works for you, makes you secure, makes you more Jesus-centered and loving, I have no interest in talking you out of that. I am suggesting for those of us that that's not working for, there are other ways of understanding how God's spirit of influence works within the complexities of a universe that we don't even fully comprehend. And therefore, we can say, I've got to learn from my foolishness. Adam can come to me as my brother and say, brother, you're acting foolish, and you need to move in this place of wisdom in this area of your life if you don't want to keep suffering the consequences. That is fine. But what I cannot do is operate off of spirituality that says God's unhappy with me and I'm in disfavor until I start performing correctly again. That will kill you. In fact, when I recognize I rest securely, if I don't rest securely in God's love, I cannot bring him into the realm of my shame and hypocrisy. But if I'm secure in God's love, guess what? He is welcome into the realms of my shame and hypocrisy. And these become the places where I most powerfully and intimately run face to face in his life-transforming grace and mercy and love. So we've got to operate from a place of security, not insecurity. And he finally ends this up by just simply saying, I and the Father are one. We've pointed this out again. This is a staggering claim, and it leads to the rising tension here in the narrative of John. But it's also the climax of Jesus' self-revelation in this chapter. He is not simply a voice for God, he is the voice of God. And in this unity, we see the heart of salvation. It is not a courtroom drama. It is a communion of love that draws us in. Historically, we've mentioned this before, theology calls this theosis. It's the idea that we're not just saved from something, but that we're being drawn into divine life. Jesus' oneness with the Father isn't a barrier, it's a bridge. It's not a barrier meant to intimidate or exclude. It is a bridge that invites us into communion, into divine participation, which is theosis. So, as we get ready to close, let's talk about a practice that I want to encourage you to at least try. And I understand, I've sat through many a sermon, and I get it. I don't always take the application section home and practice it. Many times because I disbelieve it before I do practice it. I kind of become cynical. That's fine. That's okay. I'm just asking you, in spite of your cynicism, show your strength, not by yielding to it, but by trying something in spite of your cynicism. Just try it for a few days. This is just an introduction into just a mini practice of meditation and how practicing this stillness and encountering the truth can begin to change your soul. I'm just so blown away by this. I'm 52 and I've spent so many years going to conferences, reading books, trying to find this self-improvement thing, this thing that would make me a better human being, a better follower of Jesus. I'm stunned by how powerful it is to just be invited to sit in my brokenness in silence and just bring the raw reality of who I am into the presence of a holy God. And he doesn't shame or reject. He heals and restores. So here is your practice this week. Practice resting in God's love. Really resting from that place. Set a timer, 5 or 10 minutes, depending on what you feel comfortable with. Once again, I want you to sit in a quiet place. And first of all, we're beginning to breathe slowly. Now, this is not just popular spirituality. It's so much deeper than that. It's not just the science of breath work, which I believe in, but it's even deeper than that. It's returning back to the moment of creation, where the Bible says Adam was formed out of the dust of the earth, and God breathed into his nostrils, and he became a living soul. So the breath was the first evidence of the presence of God among humanity. And so it's a great place to start your day and to start your time of devotion. Those deep breaths. And guess what? The presence of that oxygen is there when I'm at my best. And it's there sustaining me when I'm at my very worst. Just like the presence and love of God. It is as intimate and flowing as the breath in and out of our lungs. We take that, we slow down. As I said last week, my recommendation, because the mind, heart, and body are all connected in ways that we may not always be aware of. But this does something different in my posture than this. So I take my breaths, reminded of the presence of God. We put our palms up, showing receptivity. And then this week, it's very simple. It's a breath prayer that has 4 movements, 2 inhales and 2 exhales. On the first inhale, you will simply whisper the prayer, I am known. On the second one, you whisper the prayer, I am held. And yes, I get where that might sound cheesy right here, right now. Try it anyway. I am known and I am held. The second movement is very simple. You are here and I trust you. Let's close our eyes for just a moment. Deep breath. And just practice. I am known. I am held. You are here. I trust you. I am known. I am held. You are here. And I trust you. We just sit with those breath prayers. We sit with it 5-10 minutes. Let it begin to direct the narrative in your mind, the narrative of your day. And then move forward that day in a place of security, not insecurity and reaction. Then you just end with you offer thanks. Not because life is easy, but because love is real. Let it become part of your rhythm. Let it shape your week. Let it teach you that the shepherd does not just speak. He stays and he holds, and he will never let you go. Would you stand with me as we get ready to take communion? The prayer team will be up at the sides of the platform here.